Then in theory, I'm rolling. Okay, good. Here we go. Make sure she takes this. Hi, welcome. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good, thank you.
My name is Patrick Myers. I'm a psychologist. You'll find me roaming all over town, but one of the places that I roam and practice is right downstairs in a place called Complement Healthcare. There were a few handouts made, but obviously not enough for everybody. So if you really want a handout, then you can grab a card, email me, and I will email you handouts, okay? The other advantage of doing that is that you will get color handouts. The ones that I printed off here were black and white, so if you want.
Here, I'll take it. You take a look.
So if you want color handouts, then you can email me and I'll send you some color handouts. Okay, so tonight's topic is about stress. I'm going to be talking about all kinds of things. This presentation is a very long presentation, unfortunately. I'm going to try and clip through some bits very, very quickly that aren't 100% pertinent to here. There's a few things that are oriented towards business in here, so we'll just sort of go with it as it is. So tonight I'm going to cover a little bit about stress, what's been happening with us as a human race as far as stress is concerned. I'm going to be talking about the effects of chronic stress. I'm going to talk a little bit about the opposite of the stress response, something called the relaxation response. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about something really weird called ultradian rhythms and how they play into stress. And then lastly but not leastly, I'm also going to talk a little bit about some alternative other ideas for dealing with stress. Okay? So that's sort of where we are headed tonight. Alright, so here's some fun facts and figures. 26% of adult Americans report being on the verge of a serious nervous breakdown. Some people, they can't get away without checking their email, all these kinds of things. So all kinds of fun little facts, lots of pain that is associated with stress at work and all these kinds of things. What we are finding is that people are now working longer but interestingly, when we take a look at income and sort of put it forward, that basically we're working longer, but by the same dollars we're actually making the same amount. So that's kind of a crazy thing to do. I love this little fact that I found. The Japanese document approximately 10,000 cases per year of, I don't know how to pronounce this, karush, I think, or death by overworking. Right? So all kinds of things that are related to stress. One of the things that you will find with stress is that stress can lead to all kinds of physical and mental health problems. The biggest one that we want to be concerned about is depression. The World Health Organization right now has declared that depression is number 4 on the leading contributor to global burden of disease. Actually, that was in 2000. By the year 2020, it's going to be number 2. It's kind of a scary number. Again, some more statistics. 34% of British Columbians suffer from chronic illness and consumed 80% of our healthcare budget in 2005. So, some important things to look at as far as what happens when we stress ourselves out too much. Here was something cute. I found this at Expedia. Top 4 reasons why people don't take a vacation. They can't afford it. They didn't plan ahead. They would rather take the holiday pay, and they say that work is their life. Right? So, and actually I had another little page here. Where is that? Which didn't make it onto my slides. How do Canadians respond to stress? So 48% say that sleep is impacted, 41% say personal health is impacted, 33% say that family life is impacted, 23% say that sex life is impacted, and this is all negatively, of course. 23% say that work performance is impacted negatively. However, 31% say that stress improves their work performance. 48% say stress indicates that they are involved in important things, and 43% say that they cope with stress by doing exercise. So there's some interesting things. Basically, these next two slides basically say that preventative medicine is a good idea. So here we have a bunch of people, Best Buy, everyone knows that company. They started doing something, a results-only work environment, which is more, how would you say, responded to the individual. When they did that, they saw that productivity went up, and employee turnover went down quite dramatically. People started liking working for Best Buy. And then again, more preventative medicine here. Again, we start realizing that there are benefits to proactively dealing with stress. So bottom line here, for every dollar invested, $5.78 is a return on investment by dealing with stress proactively. That's kind of cool. Okay, so we talk about the exponential increase in the human population and technological innovation. A couple of people have commented on my little iPhone that I'm using to tape this with. There is the exponential increase in pollution, and of course, accompanying all that stuff comes chronic stress. So some interesting facts and figures here. Before 10,000 BC, there were under 1 million people on this planet, all right? People were basically hunter-gatherers, they lived in tribes, and stress was related to food, shelter, and predators. Then came the Neolithic, or the agricultural revolution, starting around 10,000 BC. Population increases to about 200 million at the peak of the Roman Empire, which is about 1 AD, okay? Again, stress is changing a little bit. Now it's related to weather, insects, and invading armies. And then until 1800, the population was basically regulated by diseases such as the Black Plague, and it hovered in around 500 million across the whole planet, okay? 1800 to 1900, all of a sudden we have the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden the population skyrockets. So all of a sudden now, 1900, we have 1.6 billion people on this planet. Greater Vancouver District has 43,000 people in the Lower Mainland. Cool, okay. Apollo 11, how many people remember the first landing on the moon? Some of us remember that, right. Apollo 11, 1969, there are 3.8 billion people on this planet. Greater Vancouver is, where's Greater Vancouver? Is just under 1 million people. Today, we have crossed the threshold of 7 billion people on this planet, and the population of Greater Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, is sitting at 2.3 million people. It causes stress. So here's a really fun bunch of places to go. These are world clocks and population clocks, just to show you what happens. And so I went and put in my birth date and all this kind of stuff, and I am the, what is that? That's a huge number.
Yeah.
Person born on this planet of the current population, and I was preceded by an even larger number of people in the history of time. You can actually go to these websites. There's a bunch of them. There's also, you know, they also say about how much energy we're using, how much food, you know, mining, all that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of cool world meters and population meters that you can go to and kind of scare the willies out of yourself here. Yeah, it starts getting stressful, huh? All right. Okay, so basically what has happened here is that our technology, our population, all this stuff has gone kaboom. Our human minds can keep up with that, but our bodies are not entirely built in an evolutionary process overnight. It takes a while for us to evolve. So back in 1900, what was killing us, right? Well, you can see pneumonia, tuberculosis, diarrhea, heart diseases, head injuries, kidney problems, accidents, cancer, senility, diphtheria. Notice how far down cancer goes, right? What happens when we start looking at modern day? Wow, cancer all of a sudden goes right up to the top, right? Heart disease is way up there, stroke is up there, chronic and lower respiratory diseases, again, accidents. And one of the interesting ones that I pulled out is at number 11, we have, well, 10 or 11, depending on which thing you go by. We're sitting at a suicide rate. Wow, okay. So it seems that, and I'll show you a little later, it seems that what used to kill us no longer does. We've sort of defeated all this, and now what's killing us is stress-related diseases. You'll see that again in a moment. Being alive today is the leading cause of stress. So, there is a famous individual at Harvard by the name of Walter Cannon, and he was taking a look at animals and people, and he noticed that there was a profound set of involuntary physiological changes that are hardwired into our brain and into any animal's brain that occurs when we are faced with challenging situations, right? This was referred to as the fight or flight response. So, the fight or flight response is something that gets activated, and you know, typically psychologists use this example. You know, you have cavemen walking through the jungles of the cave, right? All of a sudden, saber-toothed tiger jumps out. What happens to you? All these physiological changes happen, right? You start breathing faster, all this kind of stuff. We're going to go through those in a moment, right? All these things happen. Okay, so that's the flight response. Suppose I'm sitting in my nice little cave having, you know, some rabbit meat or something like this, and all of a sudden a saber-toothed tiger comes in walking through the front of the cave. I can't run. I got a cave behind me here. So what do I have? I have a slight chance of surviving if I can make myself as scary as possible and chase this saber-toothed tiger off. If he's not that hungry, I'll win, right? If he's really hungry, well, you know, I'm not going to do so well, right? But that's the fight response. What do we have in modern day? We have a brand new animal that we have to be worried about. I'm walking across the street and all of a sudden there's a car or a bus headed for me. Guess what? Same responses happen as if it were a saber-toothed tiger, right? So, fight or flight is a 20-minute burst of extreme energy that is designed to protect the organism. Within 20 minutes, you've either escaped or your lunch. Here we have Hans Selye, who was a Canadian, so we have something to be proud about. He was the big guy who really started looking at something called the stress response, which is basically the fight or flight response. And he basically said that stress is anything in the environment that causes the organism to adapt. Now, how did Hans Selye come about to find all this stuff? And actually, he found it by accident. He was actually a very clumsy researcher when he first started in his grad days. And what they were doing is they were testing a particular substance. They were injecting rats with a particular substance, seeing what kind of effects it would have on these rats, okay? But he was a rather clumsy guy, and you know, he's jabbing these poor rats and dropping them, you know, and all this kind of stuff, causing them a lot of stress, okay? So, you know, he then, once he figures he's waited long enough, then he euthanizes the rats and he tears them open, you know, cuts them open, finds out that they're filled with all kinds of stomach ulcers and stuff like that, right? Good thing, because otherwise we would have blamed that particular substance that he was injecting into the rats for having been the problem. Good thing he ran a control group. Control group is, they get the same rough handling with Mr. Sellier, but they don't get the injected substance, right? And guess what he found? These poor rats had the same conditions. And he's going like, why is that? The substance should be having the effect, not what's happening here. And so eventually he discovered that what it was the rough handling, and he came up with this huge body of work on the stress response. How could I do so badly on that stress test? I've been cramming for it my whole life. All right. More modern day fellow by the name of Robert Sapolsky. He's a really interesting character. I saw him about, when was it, 2009, and he's a real cool character to watch. Anyways, he basically describes stress as anything that knocks an organism out of homeostasis. Does everyone know what homeostasis is? It's basically your sense of balance, okay? And the stress response is anything that the organism, or me or you, would do to get back to homeostasis. So here we go. If I'm walking across the street, what's going to happen to me, right? I'm walking across the street. First thing that'll probably happen is I'll go, muscles tighten, right? I will probably start breathing, you know, I'll go like this. What else will happen? My heart will start racing, blood pressure will start going up, then I'll start breathing really fast. I'll have a huge cascade of stress hormones, namely cortisol and adrenaline. What else happens? Oh yes, liver releases a whole pile of glucose into the system, glucose being the food that the body needs. I'm breathing really fast, trying to get in extra oxygen into the body, because if there's a bus coming across the street at me, I need to act really quickly, and I need all my resources to get out of the way of the bus. However, I don't need all my resources. So I'm walking across the street, and let's see, what should we start off with? I'm walking across the street, and I've just had this wonderful lunch. All of a sudden I see a bus coming. What's more important, for me to digest that lunch, or for me to get out of the way of the bus, right? Dumb question. So our digestion, the energy gets taken away from the digestive system and put into our muscles here to get out of the way of the bus, right? I'm walking across the street having this wonderful little fantasy about my partner tonight and what we're going to do, and what's more important? That I continue having my little fantasy or getting out of the way of the bus, right? I'm walking across the street and a bus comes just at the same moment. The little H1N1 virus happens to be drifting along, and I go, now where's that H1N1 virus? Sitting in here. What's more important than I do? Worry about this H1N1 or get out of the way of the bus, right? Again. So there's a whole bunch of things that are going to go down as we take energy away from these systems, and there's a whole bunch of things that are going to go up that are going to get me out of the way of that bus. So these are the things that are going to happen to me, you know, if there's a bus coming, right? All these things are going to happen to me. But what happens at work when I get overloaded with work? I love this picture. So we don't get a break at work, right? And so this is what we, oh yes, the stress reduction kit. Place the kit on a firm surface, follow the directions in the circle of the kit, repeat step 2 as necessary or until unconscious. If unconscious, cease stress reduction activity. That's cute. Okay, so Sometimes we don't get a break, and that is what we refer to as chronic stress, right? It's a little more low level than having to get out of the way of the bus, but when I'm stacked up with work here and there, then, you know, it's a matter of my body is still in a stress state. So, what happens, and I didn't give credit to this, so I'll mention it. I got this from stress.com. What happens to our various systems if we are in a state of chronic stress? And so here are some physical symptoms. This was found on stress.com. Here's some physical symptoms that might happen as a result of chronic stress, right? We might get dizzy, we might get sleep disturbances, we might have chest pain, all kinds of different things, skin problems, shaking, trembling, tremors, all these kinds of things. So stress has a real physical effect, or chronic stress does, right? Emotionally, we feel tense, on edge, or hypervigilant, these kinds of things. We may get anxious, or we may get depressed. We may even, when we go to a real extreme, we may even get suicidal. We may become more irritable, all these kinds of things, right? Sometimes we just give up, so we become apathetic, right? So these are all things that happen emotionally when, or have the potential of happening when we're under chronic stress. How about what do we do? What we do behaviorally is that we might eat more, or we might eat less, right? Some people, when they get stressed, they eat less, some eat more. We might increase our coffee consumption just to get through the day, right? We might be sleeping more or less. All kinds of things, right? We might engage in little bad habits, maybe. I call them little bad habits. So all kinds of things happen to us behaviorally, and then also intellectually, there are all kinds of things like memory gaps, memory losses, this kind of thing. I still remember, this is kind of a fun story. I still remember when I first started my PhD, I was in a strange town, no friends, and for some reason the phone company could not connect me up for a whole month. And I'm going to the school and coming back, and all of a sudden one night I find myself walking down the street going, where am I? Where's home, right? And this was because I was so stressed because I didn't have the ability to go out and connect with my social supports because I didn't have a phone. And because, you know, when you first start your PhD, they get you to do all these things. So those are things. Concentration, you know, I typically hear concentration problems, judgment, objectivity, learning new things. Those all become difficult. So here is where I start to look at that list that we had earlier: cancer, heart, stroke, asthma. Well, what happens when we get stressed, right? These are all going up. Are they directly associated with these things? And I would have a tendency to suggest many of them are related directly to stress. Okay. So running my own business has given me an ulcer, 2 heart attacks, 4 nervous breakdowns. I manufacture relaxation tapes. So is all stress bad? And the answer is not all stress is bad. There is something that we call eustress or challenge. All right? And basically it looks like this. What we have along the bottom, increasing this way, is the level of pressure, the level of arousal, the level of stress going this way, okay? Going up this way, we have your performance, we have your health, we have your happiness, we have your ability to cope with life. You will notice that if you have too little stress in life, life doesn't work very well. You're not performing well. If you have, which is what most people have, is if you have too much stress in your life, then again, you're not performing well. You're not very happy, these kinds of things. If you can find just the right amount of pressure, the right amount of stress. This is what we are going to call your optimal level eustress, or what I call challenge. Okay? So, not all stress is bad, but generally when I am seeing clients, what's happening is that they're running too hard and they are running on empty. So then we have a fellow by the name of Herbert Benson, and Herbert Benson started in the 70s. He caught on to the tail end of the 60s, and he was fascinated with meditation, all that kind of stuff. And he started studying all this stuff, and he made the realization that, whoa, this is good stuff. And so he wrote a book way back then. It was groundbreaking, something called The Relaxation Response. What does the relaxation response do? It basically does to the body the complete opposite of what the stress response does. Now, here's the problem with the relaxation response. The stress response is hardwired into your brain. If I'm starting to walk across the street and there's a bus coming at me, I am going to physically, mentally, emotionally, and behaviorally react. All right? The relaxation response is not hardwired into your brain to some degree. That's why I'm doing this, is trying to suggest to you that it would be a good idea to, if you're stressed, to learn the relaxation response. Okay? Does all kinds of wonderful things to the body. So there's pain relief, there's clearer thinking, sense of calm, lower heart rate, better breathing, immune function increase, all those things. Benson went one step further. And this, I think, a lot of people haven't paid attention to this study, but this is quite a groundbreaking study. 2008, he published this study. Basically, he had two groups of people. He had a group of people who were regular relaxers, regular meditators, and he didn't specify what he would do as relaxation. He just wanted to know that people regularly, every day, took some time to really wind down, relax, in the middle of the day, not at the very end when you're trying to go to sleep, right? Then he compared them to a group of people who don't relax, right? And then he taught those people who don't relax, he taught them various relaxation techniques, all right? He gave them CDs to go home and practice with and all this kind of stuff, and this program went for 8 weeks. After 8 weeks, the people who had now been taught how to relax, how to meditate, started looking like, and I'm going to explain what that means in a moment, started looking like the regular meditators. And what do I mean by looking like? Benson went all the way down to your molecular structure. He went all the way down to DNA, right? So he had something called, and this is a very sophisticated thing that didn't exist in the 70s, something that has only existed in the last couple of years. He came up with something, he used something called genomic microarray analysis, and he noticed that your genes are physically changing. And so here he has a little map, right? This is a map, and don't try to worry about what it's exactly saying, but this is a map, and you can see that the map is very different from one to the next. And basically what he's saying is that this is how your genes light up here, and this is how they light up over there once you start relaxing, right? Quite fascinating. So, basically he says that the long-term daily practice of relaxation techniques helps reduce the stress, effects of stress at the level of your genes. So in particular, there are things like pain reduction, there is antioxidant protection that increases, there's lowered blood pressure, those are the main ones, and And then there's one other one, which is, I always screw up this word, cell apoptosis, which is regular programmed cell death. What happens with cancer is when that system goes awry. And so although stress is not directly related to the cancer, it is indirectly related to cancer. So this is at a genetic level that relaxation is helping. I went and saw, in 2011, I saw another fellow that you will see, I'll mention him a little later, Rossi, and he has done a similar study and found even more significant results doing this kind of thing, all right? This is my favorite relaxation take. It's the sound of ocean waves crashing against the shore, snatching my boss's body off his beach chair and carrying him out to sea. All right, so now is where I get a little bit weird, I guess you might say. So this is where we basically go to a place where I say that everything has a resonance, everything vibrates, right? We typically think of a guitar string, you pluck it, and you'll hear a sound that comes out of it as it resonates. The string, which then translates to the body, which then starts shaking up the air at a particular frequency and all this kind of stuff. Everything resonates, including there is a resonance that happens within yourself. So here's a very simple example of a resonance that happens within yourself. When we take a look at people who sleep, we see that you go through these resonances or these cycles where you start from an alert state, you slowly fall down, down, down into a very deep state of sleep. You come up, you have your dreaming state, then you go back down again into a very deep state of sleep. You go back up to the dreaming state and down like this. So there is something called, and this is basically Kleitman who started all this, basically proposed the existence that this rhythm that you just saw earlier exists in your waking self as well, okay? And basically he suggested that there is this rhythm that happens, goes up and down 24/7 in your body, and it occurs on a cycle of about an hour and a half to 2 hours, where you become a little more alert, and then you become a little less alert, and you become a little more alert, and you become a little less alert, right? It was thought at one time that it was caused by the sun. Now we start to realize that it's not entirely controlled by light, that there are also other things within the brain that also help regulate these cycles. So the basic I'm awake, I'm asleep cycle, this is something that occurs over a day, and so it is called a circadian rhythm. Circ being the root for around, and dian being the root for a day. What we are talking about here is something called ultradian rhythms. Ultra meaning within, dian being a day. So these occur on a regular basis within a day. So it looks a little like this. At night you're going up and down, you have some dreams. During the day you have your alert periods, you have your little bit not so alert periods. It rises and then it falls again. And this, then, this rising and falling affects a lot of the systems within your body. So, for example, here we have cortisol. Now, cortisol is a natural substance within the body. It basically keeps us awake at very low levels, right? And as you can see, the cortisol here is going up and down and up and down on approximately a 2-hour cycle, right? Large amounts of cortisol, on the other hand, start getting you ready for this fight or flight system. If you don't do something about that cortisol can start eating away at the body. Small amounts keep you awake, keep you aware, right? During the evening, while you are sleeping, you have, again, this pulsation, but it's a different chemical. It's called melatonin, right? Some people might use that to help them sleep at night.
So is there a cortisol pill?
Sorry?
Is there a cortisol pill
sometimes is, do you want to take a cortisol pill? And only in very rare cases would you want to. In most cases, you don't want to be taking extra cortisol. There is so far in the sciences, there is a disagreement about exactly what's happening, but there are some people who propose that if you're running too hard, you can actually, cortisol is generated by the adrenal glands, which primarily sit on top of your kidneys, right? And there is a theory that if you run yourself too hard, you can actually get something called adrenal fatigue. For that, you know, I would leave that to the experts and say, go check your doctor as to whether or not it would be useful there. But for the most part, you do not want to be taking a cortisol pill. It's a little bit like gasoline, right? A small amount in your engine, if you release a small amount, mix it with the air, makes your car go really good. You splash a big lot of it on your campfire, and what happens? Kaboom, right? So that's a little bit like how cortisol acts in the body. Small amounts is good. Large amounts, when you're stressed, well, if you've got a tiger or a bus chasing you, is good. But if you don't have the tiger or bus chasing you, all that cortisol is not good. And as you saw earlier, it causes all kinds of problems. Emotional, physical, mental, behavioral problems. So again, here we have blood sugars, we have insulin, we have glucose. This is plasma renin over here, which again is part of the blood. This is a measurement of fluctuations in alertness that somebody did a little study watching the alertness going up and down throughout the day. Again, these all seem to cycle on approximately 2-hour cycles, give or take. And so we get to this, and I ask people then, and all too often when they come to the therapy office, this is what lunch looks like, right? All too often I ask people, what does your coffee break look like? And they say, it looks a little like this. Right? And then I ask them, what does your lunch break look like? And they say, well, it looks a little like this. Right? You're given a coffee break and a lunch break for a reason. And if you're stressing yourself out, what did I say about digestion, right? You're not going to be digesting your food properly. If you're eating on the run, you're not going to be digesting your food properly, and that can lead to all kinds of other problems. So here we get to, nope, we're going to have a little comic first. You can call me a workaholic if I brought my work home with me, but I don't go home. Now we get to Mr. Rossi. So Mr. Rossi, then, he's basically sort of more clearly defined what he sees in these cycles, and he says that this is the ultradian stress response. Basically, you have signals that say, take a little break, right? So you might notice that, you know, as you're working at your computer, you notice that your alertness is down a little bit. You know, you might have to read a sentence more than once, or you might notice that, you know, that you're looking for the paperclip over here and you can't seem to find it wherever it is, you know. These kinds of things. So these are little signals that are saying that you're not quite as alert as you should be, right? But then you just work through it. And what happens is when you work through it, the body is starting to go down in cortisol, but you're not slowing down with the body, right? And so then the body makes the assumption that, gee, he's not slowing down, so that must mean that there's a tiger stalking him. So we better ramp the cortisol up. And so you will get what's referred to as a second wind. It's basically you're high on cortisol, sugar, and or perhaps if you're drinking coffee, stimulants as well. This second wind, typically you'll find that runners or anybody who exercises really hard, you'll see that, you know, you get the runner's high, and so you're running along for the first half hour or so, you're just killing yourself, and then all of a sudden it becomes easy, right? What is that? Well, to some degree you're high on cortisol and sugar and all that kind of stuff. Then what happens if you continue ignoring it, then what happens is mistakes, the irritability, these kind of start kinds of things start coming in, and then finally the body starts rebelling, the mind starts rebelling, exhaustion, illness, depression follows. So that's the ultradian stress syndrome. And then of course, this happens, kaboom. Instead, Rossi suggests, and he even has a book out, although it's hard to get a hold of these days, is he calls it the 20-minute break. Basically, he suggests about every 2 hours, you recognize these signals in your body that say take a break. You take 15, 20 minutes. You sit down. You relax. Right? As a psychologist, I quite often hand out relaxation CDs, but you don't need to go that far into relaxation. Just sitting down and savoring that nice cup of green tea. Don't look at the screen. Just savor the green tea. Right? Go over. You haven't seen your friend for a little while. Go have a little chat with your next door neighbor, right? That's relaxing, that's different, right? Sit at the window and enjoy the beauty out there. Wow, look at all that out there, right? It's still somewhat summer out there, it's getting dark. So when you do this, then the body gets its chance to relax. What happens as a result then is that you have this mental process that if you take the time to relax, the brain also gets this time to have these spontaneous, very creative thoughts, right? And that's what happens next, and then of course, eventually you come to a rejuvenation and a normal state of mind and body. And I believe, yeah, so here, it looks like this. So he basically says that there's a 4-stage creative process. It doesn't just affect the body, it affects the mind as well. You start off trying to work on an issue, and then you sort of finally give up on it, and all of a sudden you get this flash of insight, here's how I'm going to do it, and then you go, okay, and now you start winding back down to normal and start implementing what you've come up with, right? So, the underlying message is, which I'm not doing very well of here right now because there's a lot to cover, is old song that went, slow down, move 2 minutes. Take a break every 2 hours. A lot of people don't know this. We actually have women to thank for coffee breaks. Isn't that cool? Where did that all happen? Well, where that all happened was back during the war, all the men went overseas. They left manufacturing plants. Who had to work manufacturing plants? The women did. More armaments, more bombs, more guns, all this kind of stuff. And one company realized that, geez, we're not getting quite the production that we got out of the men. And they're going like, what's wrong? So they went and hired some bright cookie of a psychologist who watched these women work. And he started to notice this fluctuation about every 2 hours. And so he went to the boss and he says, I got a crazy idea here for you. But let's see what happens. He says, let's start implementing a little break every 2 hours. Let's have a coffee break. So thank you, women. We have coffee breaks now as part of our society. And lo and behold, guess what? Some of these women were more productive when they got that little break. Cool. You can get more done by doing less. Doesn't make sense. All right, take your coffee breaks and your lunches. So then we have Mr. Robbins, who talks a little bit about some work de-stressors, looking at priorities, breaking tasks down, taming technology. So what I was talking earlier about was slowing down, getting more done that way. This is something called the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 principle. What is interesting about this is that they keep on, studying this in various different places, some of it being psychology, but in other places too. And the same number seems to come up over and over again. And basically what it says is that 80% of your production sort of translate that to a work day, 80% of your work day's productivity is going to be done in the first 2 hours. The rest of the day, you're not putting out a whole lot. So,
Like at work, my work, they changed our screen when we open our computers. Instead of our emails coming up, we see our calendar, and they did a study, and it really changed people's stress when they came into work in the morning, that they didn't see 50 emails that had come in overnight, that they see their calendar and then.
interesting, interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's really.
So, again, these are all little things that people sometimes study and they find interesting, those things shifting just a little bit. It's amazing how.
Yeah, simple thing, but
Yeah.
it's changed everyone's approach to the day.
Very cool. All right, what else? Eliminating perfectionism. We did a little thing, we talked on perfectionism earlier this year. Good enough is good enough, right? Ask for feedback, stop multitasking, learn how to say no, invest time in building networks, friendships, et cetera, and don't reinvent the wheel. So many people have already invented it for you. All right. So there are two primary things that I always suggest for stress management. The first was what I talked about, what I have been talking about, which is relaxation. Really learning to relax. The other one is exercise. So to some degree I put it this way, is that I am constantly under the gun all day long. I've got these stress hormones circulating in my body. How am I going to get rid of them? Right? Well, if I'm on the floor of the jungle running away from a saber-toothed tiger, what am I doing? Right? I'm using these big muscles here, and I'm pumping a whole pile of the cortisol through it. Basically, I'm metabolizing all of that cortisol. And so, in modern days, it's very seldom that we have saber-toothed tigers chasing us. Once in a while we have a bus that chases us, right? Or a car. But very seldom. Most of what our stress is that paper pile that's in front of us, the deadlines. And so how do we deal with all that cortisol? Well, one is we stop the cortisol from being produced in the first place. That is the relaxation response. The second is if we are producing cortisol, let's learn to metabolize it, right? So that's where exercise comes in. Exercise has all kinds of great benefits. Burns calories, promotes sleep, releases endorphins, promotes neurogenesis, the development of new brain cells, right? Increases lung capacity, decreases resting heart rate and blood pressure, helps prevent cancer and other illnesses. And it's more effective than antidepressants. So here's a little study that was done, how long ago? A couple of years ago. I don't have the date anymore. Anyways. They had a group of people who were all diagnosed with major depression, all right? And they put them into one of three groups. So they put them into an exercise-only regime. This exercise-only regime was a monitored by an exercise therapist at a gym, okay? And basically you had a little warm-up and a little cool-down, and for a half an hour in between, you were exercising at, I think it's 70 to 85% of maximum heart rate, okay? So the whole thing, the whole exercise regime took about 45 minutes. 5 days a week, about 45 minutes, of which the half hour was the intense part, right? Another group, they get medication only. They get Zoloft. And the last group gets a combination of both, okay? So you go through this program, you're in this program for 4 months, then at the end of the program they say, okay, you're free to go, right? And so the people who are taking medication, actually any of these groups, people who are taking medication can continue taking their medication. People who are in medication can stop their medication if they want. The people who are in medication can stop medication and start doing exercise. The people who are suffering medication can start doing exercise in addition to their medication. So they were basically given their free will. Then the researchers come back 6 months later. So from the time that the person walked into the study to the time at which this data is collected is a total of 10 months. Okay? Now, the researchers have done their review of the literature. And they saw that the literature says exercise is good for you. Great. It's an intervention. They saw from the literature that medications are good for you. Great. It's an intervention. So they made the assumption, gee, if we put two good things together, we're going to get something super fantastic. And they were rather surprised to go, gee whiz, the medication and the combination group looked virtually the same. And that it was the exercise group, the exercise alone group, that had the highest recovery rate from depression and the lowest relapse rate. Cool, huh? What fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? Okay, so those are the two primary stress coping tools that I offer people. One is learn to relax, the other is start exercising, okay? There are a bunch of other things that we can also look at for dealing with stress. One of them is this very common little poem called the Serenity Prayer. Basically, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that is a really important concept with stress. There was a study, it was rather interesting, many years ago, there was a study where they were looking at, everyone remember 3 Mile Island? So they were looking at 3 Mile Island, and normally when we talk about stress coping, we want you to actively do something, right? And with 3 Mile Island, they actually found that the people who were trying to be active with something that was completely beyond their control were actually faring worse than the people who just sat down and cried a lot. I'm making a simplification there, but to some degree, it's important to be able to be flexible in your ability to look at the world, right? What can I actually cope with, and what do I just have to put into the background? So, in other words, foster the ability to reframe things, compartmentalize things, and find some predictability in life, okay? There's a certain element of us that likes to be spontaneous, but there's a certain element of us that likes to be safe, that likes things predictable, right? So it's a good stress coping tool is to find some predictability. You worry too much, it doesn't do you any good. It does for me. 95% of the things that I worry about never happen. More stress coping tools. Oh, here's where the bad guy comes in. Reduce all the fun things in life, right? Reduce caffeine, reduce nicotine, reduce alcohol, drugs, reduce your weight, reduce TV, reduce internet, reduce computer games. You guys must really dislike me right now, right? I had to quit drinking coffee. It keeps me awake during the presentations. So what are some of the things that we can do instead? Music, dancing, hobbies, sports, pets, laughter, play more, get out with friends, etc., etc. A really important one for stress. I don't follow my own guidelines sometimes. I was up late last night preparing this presentation and I didn't quite get my 8 hours of sleep. But I did do a little meditation before I started this year, so I guess I'm sort of forgiven. Anyways, appropriate sleep. I did a presentation a while back on sleep and all the negative effects that happen if you don't sleep appropriately. So appropriate sleep, approximately 8 hours a night. You can also include meditation, spirituality. Another thing to being able to cope with stress is to some degree start building your resilience. accepting that there is a certain amount of predictability, but there's also a certain amount of unpredictability about life. So one small thing different might look like try brushing your teeth with your left hand or your non-dominant hand for those who are lefties. Try brushing your teeth with your left hand. Instead of going the same old way home, take a detour. Go see what's down the neighborhood. These kinds of things. So this helps strengthen your resilience. And it doesn't have to be big things, just little tiny things. Do one small thing different every day. Ooh, that stress workshop did the trick. Felt much better after decking with the instructor. So, hey, ooh, I did a real good clip there. Didn't clip through it, but I did pretty good there. That's not bad, eh? All right. So here's where I say thank you very much. Appreciate you all for listening. Do you have any questions that I might be able to answer? Yeah. I'm going to turn off this this thing so that we don't need the questions on here.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll just